All right.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Critiquery. Tonight we have read two pieces from Grace, our submitting author. The first one, How Doc Holliday Saved Me, and the second piece was Something He Could See Himself in. So we're going to start tonight in the normal process. We'll go around. Everybody try to say at least one positive thing, something you enjoyed, which should not be difficult, and at least one thing that you'd like to discuss in group that you think the author could have some improvements on. We will start bucking trend with Brad.
Really? Hello, Edian. How are you tonight?
I was unprepared for your question. I'm great, Brad. Thank you for asking.
Are we doing both pieces?
That's actually a great question. Why don't we start?
It's up to you guys.
Why don't Grace? Actually, you don't have a preference at all, Grace?
I don't care, and I just sent. Are we doing both pieces, like one and then the other? If we have time, yeah. And I don't care which one you start first. I just sent two because I thought one was too short to talk about.
Okay. Well, is there either one that you're super interested in feedback on?
No.
No. Okay. Well, why don't we start? I think in the order that they were sort of in the email, which was something he could see himself in. So, Brad, do you want to give us something about that?
Okay. Yeah.
And that's the one with
thought,
the guy with the tattoos.
So, what he could see himself in, I thought the premise was really interesting and unique, and I guess and creative. I mean, I've never read a short story before, about a person's kind of quest to decide what tattoo they should put on the last remaining little bit of bare skin they have on their body. I thought it was really interesting. And in getting to know the characters, he, really kind of struggled with, this way of expressing his faith. I enjoyed that. I enjoyed the concept and the story. It read easily. And so I liked it. And then the thing I would talk about, I guess, is that I thought there could have been a little bit more tension, I suppose, because, it's clearly he's trying to overcome the obstacle of figuring out what he should put on himself. But I felt like most of the tension was just him, not being able to come up with the idea. And I thought maybe there should be something that was a little bit, more of an actual obstacle or something in his way. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Brad. How about Ian? What were your thoughts?
Thanks for having me. I really liked, maybe like Brad said, the character of a religious zealot tattoo artist. I think that's a neat angle, and it's not. I haven't met tattoo artists with that kind of Venn diagram of overlap, and then a lot of zealous people, and then a lot of people who get decked out in tattoos, and so having that intersection I thought was pretty neat. And I also really liked how much Tommy appeared to love his family, especially in contrast to the upbringing that he had. I really appreciated that because it shows that he's got a rich texture to his character, something that goes all the way back to his roots. And that third scene, I think it was scene 3, where he talks about his history with Christmas and his experience with his father and his like conversion moment. I felt that was really plausible, like it was really relatable and real. And so I think that characterization was really solid. As far as something that I would want to address or come back to, Tommy ends up deciding to put the nativity on his back. And he specifically identifies with the role of Joseph in that loving kind of nuclear family creation. So once I got to the end, I kind of felt like I wasn't expecting him to make that connection, since he didn't explicitly draw out any connection to his family, any of that familial love. The scene with Jim Bob doesn't touch on family. The scene with his father kind of shows a negative contrasts, but I don't see Tommy making the leap there. And the thing that gets him into the church to Jesus in the first place to do with the nativity, it's the singing. So I guess I'm kind of on a different side of the coin from what Brad was speaking about with tension. And what I would be more interested in is kind of setting up that being the revelation that he has toward the end, with some more content in the scenes that lead up to it. But those are my opening thoughts.
Thank you so much. You cut out for just a second. Did anybody else hear that, or was it just at my computer?
It cut out for me too a little
Okay,
bit.
good. Okay.
Sometimes it'll catch up, like you'll hear them replay
Okay.
at a slightly faster pace.
All right, good. I just wanted to make sure it wasn't just me. Thank you.
Did you miss anything? Is there something you wanted?
No, I did.
Okay.
I got it. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Ian. Colin, what were your thoughts?
Yeah, I thought the story was it was pleasant, and I found that the character really interesting. I agree with what everyone else said. Just kind of a cool idea, and definitely like some an interesting like backstory and history there that we just kind of get a few glimpses of, but it's definitely like very telling. So I think we get like a good sense of character, even though it's a pretty short story. And I would agree with Brad. The thing that stood out to me the most was just the lack of like an obstacle. It seemed like all of the characters, whether it was Tommy's kids or his wife or his friend Jim Bob, that everyone seemed very nice and very polite, and everything just seemed to happen pretty smoothly. So there's plenty of different I think opportunities to add in, whether it's like a little bit of an obstacle or more of like a struggle to figure out the tattoo. But I think that was just the thing missing for me, is some sort of like conflict or obstacle or tension to kind of keep the momentum going in the story.
Thank you, Colin. Great insight as usual. Jared, what are your thoughts? Something positive and something we want to talk about.
Yes, I think like everyone that came before me, I really enjoyed the premise of somebody wanting to fill the last empty spot on themselves with a tattoo. I thought that was interesting. And it was a warm-hearted story, which is nice. I appreciate that sometimes. And then something to talk more about, I think maybe just wanting to know a little bit more about the protagonist, and because some of the things like Ian mentioned, you know, the tattoo artist zealot is an interesting combination, and it's kind of almost written as if it was very kind of normal, and that's just, you know, what it is, and everyone kind of accepts it. So I'd love to see a bit more about that conflict, if it exists. Yeah, it just and then I guess the other thing is just the wild youth is referenced, and I want to see more of that in the present, because I don't know that that would necessarily go away completely, and it seems to have kind of totally evaporated here, and I'd love to see maybe some more remnants of that.
Thank you, Jared. I would repeat so much of what we heard, especially, you know, a lot of the compliments included. One thing I don't think I heard was, at least I really enjoyed how subtle the background, the character's background was woven through the narrative. They're just single sentences or half clauses that point to a specific history that I think all of us grasp, even though there's very little direct text devoted to it. You have a person whose body is covered in tattoos, that creates one layer, and then you learn about his history with his father in a single sentence, and that creates another layer, and all of them stacked in a way that built a character with very few words. And I think part of that is because of the way it's woven, and part of that is because of the consistency of characterization. I just wanted to point to that, and I think that was one of the strongest parts in the piece. I also appreciated the general positive tone, and not dissonance, but maybe exploration of a positive tone with the person whose life choices in history are often kind of sickened with sadness as a way of creating dramatic tension, and that the author didn't do that, I think was nice. I will say, agreeing with Brad and Colin, and I think to Ian actually to some extent as well, just everybody, Jared. Let's have a whole agreement party. But was I didn't feel that the elements of the story that felt prominent to me necessarily wove into the character's final decision, and it made me question why they were highlighted. Either I wasn't getting it, or I don't know if they kind of signposted themselves enough to kind of tell you that part for me personally. And I would say that we spend the whole time with Tommy, but I didn't really get a sense of Tommy's voice. And I don't know if anybody else would agree with that, but the way the sentences are phrased, the way he thinks, doesn't kind of tell me about him. And I was maybe looking for that more personally. So I'd say that's something I would want to talk about and see what everybody else felt. But, oh, sorry. I don't know if you can hear that in the background, but I apologize if you can. I have a little dog, and she's very loud. But why don't we get to, I know the author didn't have any explicit questions. Let me just read exactly what she said. I am open to all feedback and suggestions. I want to know what areas can be expanded, especially as I'd like to make them longer.
Well, I just want to say, no, these are really great. And I'm sorry I didn't have more precise questions, but I really like these ideas if you'll want to just expand on them. So I definitely agree. If there is more of a show of familial love, that the conclusion would be more acceptable. And so showing more scenes of their family, his family life with his family that he loves, his family now, because, him thinking of himself as Joseph. And yeah, if you want to talk more about that and about the whole, whatever you see for needs of tension, I was thinking in terms of tension, there could be a non-acceptance from both groups of people, especially Christians, for his, tattoos, and then the tattoo people for his Christianity. But especially the first one, maybe just the first one. I don't know. So that's it.
All right. Why don't we take these in order? I think Ian was the person who brought up the concept of wanting to see familial love. I think that's the way you phrased it, Grace. So Ian, do you want to elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, I had thoughts for both of those. I'm sure that the scenes that are there are important enough to stay where they are. So if I were to make a suggestion, I'd want to keep it within those confines. In the opening scene, when the kids are going off to school and Sarah's like, we're going to go to a Christmas party, it's going to be awesome. And Dad's like, don't forget what the reason for the season is. I was thinking that if that, a lot of Catholic schools, they'll do a nativity tableau, like they'll do a nativity play or a Christmas story play. And if that's what they're doing as part of their Christmas party, and that's something that Tommy goes to instead of going to a church Bible study, then it would see that connection, that thematic link between his family and the nativity, which helps him realize why it's like such a perfect image for him later on. And then the way that could help you play with tension too is that, and I just assumed based on the uniforms that it was like a Catholic school or a religious school. It doesn't have to be, but if it were, then when he goes there and he's got all the tattoos and stuff, that'd be a great opportunity to show some of that conflict or some of that judgmental tension that you were just mentioning between people who are devoutly Christian and people who might look down upon or be suspicious of people with tattoos, even people with religious tattoos, because you describe them as like everywhere, it'd be a lot there. So that was my one thought there, was to bring in the nativity either earlier by having the family be involved in it, or have it be the thing that draws him into the church after his father is belligerent about Santa Claus, or that time when he was 20. If it's the nativity that he sees out front that makes him want to go inside, then you would be able to kind of thread that idea through in that scene alternately.
Thank you.
Let's keep going with this. The first thing Grace brought up, which was, and Ian, you can tell me if I'm phrasing this correctly, was the idea that the ending of the story specifically relates to family and Joseph, as he plays a role in that. And so to have familial love have a greater through line through the short story itself would kind of provide greater connection between the elements of the story and the ending. Is that where you're going with, Ian?
Yeah, that was my thought, is that the fact that he arrives at something and it's, you know, something mundane like what's on his kitchen table is totally great, and I love that. But from a story element perspective, it comes kind of out of left field because it's not an idea that's firmly established, or at least it wasn't in my mind leading up to it. So just to make it a stronger revelation for the character and for the audience, to have it kind of hinted at by having pieces of it.
That's a great idea. So having that woven in, and then also having more scenes with his family woven in. His family.
All right, Colin, what do you think about that? This idea of the ending potentially coming a little bit out of left field and needing more of a through line through the narrative, which could be bolstered by focusing on examples of familial love or something to tether it to his revelation about the nativity scene.
Yeah, I like those ideas. I think that would definitely make the ending stronger for me. And I think I'd also be curious to know a little bit more about Tommy's past. Like, his father was mentioned pretty briefly, but I don't know, maybe there's an opportunity there to kind of, you know, inject another side of, you know, what family means to him, coming from whatever difficult past he had. And then, you know, obviously showing how things have changed for him, or how his current family is totally different, or something like that.
Or it could be maybe more of his father as a counterexample, and therefore he's like the really good father.
Sure, yeah.
And then it makes more sense that he wants to identify himself with Joseph, who I guess was a really good father. I don't know.
Canonically, Joseph was a very good father, or he did a solid good guy move. But I guess opinions could vary. They haven't considered.
Okay, so I'll move on to Brad. I'll ask you the same thing. Although I will say, just for the record, normally we don't provide suggestions to the author, but we are this time because Grace specifically asked for them. And normally we bring the author in a little bit later, but because we're doing two pieces and Grace is asking for suggestions, and I think it's great for her to be able to play off of people and ask pointed questions, I think we're all okay with having the author come in early. All right, thumbs up across the board. So Brad, thoughts about incorporating familial love as a way of having a greater through line to the ending?
So I was going to say, in response to what you said, Ian, we don't really hear anything about Joseph as a father, though, do we? Because essentially, don't we stop hearing about him essentially with the birth? But I don't want to get us sidetracked, but that popped into my head.
It's true. It is true.
But I wanted to.
He takes some. Well, yeah, I won't sidetrack.
I wanted to say how much I love rat-colored chairs, because I never knew rat was a color. And I have to say, I was kind of reading through the story again when Colin and Jared were giving their opening statements, and I was smiling, not at anything they said, but because I was reading Jim Bob's description of the rattle robber, or the guy that would hold up the rattlesnake in front of a gun. I just find that really, really funny, and I thought it was just a wonderful introduction of humor into the story, and the dialogue was really well done as well.
Thank you.
But as far as the question at hand, I am now conflicted, because I was thinking as people were talking that I do like, on one side, I like the idea of having that kind of familial love in the background, and then he comes upon it at the end. But I'm one of those people, because my childhood, my family, even though it wasn't anything like Tommy's family. I mean, it was dysfunctional, and we were just a bunch of like wild children running around raising ourselves, kind of, not that bad, but it's one of those things where we're not close. siblings have all drifted apart as adults. We don't have a lot of contact with one another. And in some ways, I like the aspect of the story, kind of not pointing a big arrow at family, familial ties or familial love until near the end when when Tommy realizes, that you don't have to be tied to the past, or you don't have to be anchored by the past, that you can build that familial love, from the people you meet later in life, or like the family you choose rather than the family you were born with.
Mhm.
So I don't know, I could see either way being really fruitful.
Well, Brad, to follow up with you on that, so I think part of the idea behind Ian's potential suggestion was that the elements of the story that are mentioned may not coalesce in the ending, in the sense that the ending is clearly important and the ending makes sense, but it's a number of the elements mentioned don't necessarily all build to the ending, and that having a through line of maybe a focus that somehow brings us to the ending in a way that feels more satisfying or more is maybe the point of using that. So would you have any suggestion potentially about, well, I guess first of all, do you agree that the ending could be less left fieldy, more kind of built to?
Yeah, I would agree with that, because we don't really have, I mean, the nativity is not mentioned at all, I don't think, until that final scene. So if there was, if it was hinted at, and very subtly earlier in the piece, that would give the reader, at least glimpses of what's there in the background that Tommy's not seeing until Tommy finally has, the light bulb go off at the end. And that, I think, would probably be more satisfying.
Okay,
I
that's great.
agree. Can I ask?
Yeah, of course, Grace. Come
Dean,
on
am I
in.
allowed to ask? Okay, so in terms of, I know a couple of you said that there needs to be more tension, or you would like to see more tension, more of an obstacle. So what I was thinking of doing, and this is an idea I had originally, but is having, like I was saying before, having him be a misfit and not accept it fully, having him, some people accept him in both communities, but he has a lot of issues getting accepted in the Christian community. And maybe some of his tattoo clients think he's, goofy because he's so religious. I don't know. But so that was an idea that I had. And I just wanted to run it past you guys to ask you what you think of that in terms of a tension or obstacle or something like that.
Well, let me ask you this, Grace, because I think that's a great question, and I'll bring Jared in first to answer it. But just to help maybe people give the answer, are you thinking of keeping the piece the same length, and you're going to replace some words with this, or are you just going to let it go as long as it needs to, and this
Just
would
as
be
long as
good?
it needs to.
Okay, very cool. So, Jared, specifically with Grace's most recent question about tension, and the use of Tommy being a misfit in Christian circles or tattoo circles.
And then being, people being like, jerks to him because, he's not fully accepted because he's kind of a weird hybrid in a way.
Yes. I would say that that was kind of one of my preliminary notes about wanting to see more of his history I want to see more of his past and his present, because I think that's just usually more realistic, is to have that be there. And certainly I think part of that would be in not fitting in at church because of his tattoos, and kind of seeing him, I was wondering how, what do you think? Why did he think that tattoos were the way to demonstrate his faith? Why that instead of any other thing they could do? And so I was curious, and that would be more interesting, I think, if we saw more opposition to it, because then we get to see, okay, well, actually it really matters, because that choice to cover himself in tattoos has these consequences. And so now it becomes more, I think, compelling to see his justification for it. Obviously doesn't need to be spelled out. We don't need to see him thinking, I did it because of this, this, and this, but it could come out maybe in the narrative that way. because I thought it was interesting, and I think apparent inconsistencies in characters like this one, I think are what makes the most interesting characters. But at the same time, if those inconsistencies aren't explored, then I think that kind of leaves something out that could potentially make the story more.
I think I did say something though a little bit like he considered his body or something. Shit, I don't have the story in front of me, but I think I did hint at it a little bit, that it was kind of like a gift to God.
A song of
A work
praise
of
to the
art.
Lord
Yeah.
is the
Yeah,
word that he
yeah.
uses, which is great because of how he joins the church later, I think.
And I think what I mean is more, how did he get there? Like,
Okay.
yes, he thinks that, but where does that come from for him?
Okay, got it.
As opposed to
Okay.
any other way to express his love of God. And
Got
unrelated, but kind of, I did wonder, given his wild youth, did he cover up other tattoos with these religious tattoos? I kind of had those questions.
I originally did that.
Yeah.
I did, where I had them all changed, but then I was thinking about it practically and how hard that would be to do.
It would be, and I think sometimes, yeah,
So
I
it
don't want
was
to make
like
suggestions, but yeah.
snakes and turning into, whatever, fishes and kind of thing.
It will be a nice
Very-
reminder of how he can't really leave his past behind. But this is all.
Okay.
Well, so Jared, remember, the author did totally welcome suggestions. So, and you often have some great ones when people ask
Yeah.
for them.
No, it's great. Thanks.
I thought that was very cool, clever idea that you could deepen the impact of the ending by exploring the character's past in a way that makes his ultimate decision for what he chooses to tattoo himself in this final spot, which has a level of tension to it already, stronger and in a way emotionally more tense. Right? We get a tension between not just the interplay of the character's personal life, history, and choices, but also why his ultimate final decision carries so much emotional weight, right? And by deepening his history, we learn why that decision was such a big deal. Because I think, to get on a soapbox about it, but that just based on what Jared said, one of the reasons that maybe the piece didn't carry as much tension as I maybe could have carried more tension is that I didn't really grasp why that decision was so momentous, other than it's the last spot, and the last spot is always going to matter. But having a special emotional weight, and have that be deepened. But Jared, I want to ask you specifically to maybe dig down a little deeper. What Grace had talked about was tension. So other than she had talked about having Tommy be potentially treated as a misfit in tattoo circles, treated as a misfit in Christian circles for obvious reasons. How did you feel about that as an idea and exploring that idea?
Yeah, no, I think that would be great. I think it would be wonderful. I think it would really deepen his character. And I wouldn't know until I saw it, but it seems like a fertile ground for interesting things.
Can I just say one more thing?
Of course, you have free reign to come on in whenever you like.
I'm thinking that the reason it's so important is because all these tattoos are important because it's kind of his way of escape from, he is this misfit, and I don't know what I'm trying to say. It's just kind of his way of proving himself to the world and proving that he's all right. And so it's kind of demonstrative, in that way, like it's an outward expression of something. And so it's just what I was thinking. I don't know. I'm not sure how to put it.
I want to jump here, just a random thought that popped in my head before I forget, which was that the whole idea of having that spot on his back and discovering it being empty, to me, as I would imagine if you're getting tattoos a lot, especially around that area. I mean, for instance, the last tattoo he got around that area, wouldn't he see, when he look at that tattoo? I mean, I'm wondering how he wouldn't know that there was an empty spot until this moment. That was something I was curious about.
Okay.
In the piece. Maybe I'm
okay.
I don't know.
I also had a left field thought while we were talking about setting up that conflict and that tension and maybe that backstory piece, but I want to pay attention to time, and I don't want to take too much away from the other story about Doc Holliday. But the idea that I had was related to what Jared was saying, which was from an economy perspective, an economy of storytelling perspective, when he goes to the Bible study, it's possible he could run into the person who once fished him drunk out of the manger of the church nativity scene from back before he found Jesus. And it would be another way to thread the nativity through with his wild backstory. And in terms of tattoo cover-up ideas with a religious bent, there's a lot of Celtic imagery that uses big, blocky, thick kind of tribal tattoo style lines that if you had intricate tattoos and you wanted to cover them up with something that was visually striking, then you could get a lot of mileage out of Christian iconography in that Celtic style for cover-up tattoos. It could be that the spot on his back that Jared was talking about is the last tattoo from his old life that he needs to figure out a cover-up for, and it's got to be large enough to like cover the whole thing. But those were just some side thoughts that I wanted to stick in there before I ran out of time to
Thank you. Oh, that was great.
That was great, Ian. Thank you. So we're 35 minutes in. We've gone through most of the stuff that got brought up during the original, round robin-y kind of thing, where we had we were talking about tension, which we were covered. We were talking about having a character have more obstacles, which I don't think we necessarily discussed directly, but we had talked about linking the narrative in a potentially more cohesive way. We discussed involving more of Tommy's past, and we discussed his wild youth and potentially adding more depth to that. So the one thing maybe, Grace, that we didn't talk about was adding more obstacles to Tommy. Which is
no, we did actually, because the misfit thing, yeah.
Fantastic.
So we covered it, yeah.
So do you have any more questions?
No, I'm done. Thank you. This is great.
So we'll move on from something he could see himself in to, I think it's the day Doc Holliday saved me, or something. Okay. How Doc Holliday saved me. All right. So thank you, Grace. Right. So we'll go ahead and we'll do another little round robin thing where everybody will provide at least one positive and one thing they'd like to discuss. Why don't we start with Colin?
Sure. So I enjoyed the tone of the story. Is kind of light and kind of funny overall, although in certain parts I wasn't quite sure if it was supposed to be funny, but towards the end I found some of the like dark comedy towards the end pretty funny, just personally. But I would say overall I felt like there was a little bit of a lack of mystery. There was a lot of internal dialogue and descriptions where I felt like the reader was just kind of given information, or we were kind of told what different characters were like without the description kind of speaking for that itself. So I just felt like early on in the story I kind of knew where it was going, and it just seemed to kind of take a while to get to the end. So yeah, I would have liked to see a little bit more of like a mystery element where we're not quite sure how things are going to turn out, or who exactly is a ghost and who isn't, for example.
That's great. Thank you, Colin. So Brad, what about you? Something positive, something you'd want to talk about?
I think you cut out, Dean. But did you ask Colin one thing he wanted to talk about?
No, I was asking you. I was asking Brad.
Oh, okay. I didn't hear that first part. I enjoyed the story very much like the first piece that we talked about. I thought it was a pleasant, easy read. Generally I like the concept. I like the characters. I thought the idea of the haunting, through her dreams in the apartment building was interesting. The thing I would talk about is that I think the reasoning behind, or the explanation given for the fact that the apartment building is haunting is too close to the plot of the movie The Poltergeist for either you can't use it, or if you're going, in my opinion, or if you're going to use it, you need to have someone else realize that this is just like the movie The Poltergeist. And maybe that works out fine with the fact that Keith is a ghost and he died before Poltergeist was ever made, so he doesn't get the reference or something. I don't know, but I just thought the whole idea of, like, you know, taking away the headstones but leaving the graves there and a bunch of angry ghosts just was like, you know, come on, that's otherwise.
Just interrupt for a sec. They do that a lot in Tucson. That is done a lot, but only if you lived in Tucson and knew that, like, it would, yeah, you'd have to, you're right, but it's done a lot.
Okay, well, yeah, not being,
But
not
you're right,
having
I
ever
know
visited
it's,
Southwest, I did not know that at all.
but still, yeah,
Well,
okay, but it's a
thank you,
lot like
Brad.
the Poltergeist. Yeah, you're right. Thanks,
And
thanks, Brad.
Grace, how
Sorry.
about no, you're totally fine. You're totally fine. But how about we let's get through the round robin
Okay,
first, and
okay.
then we'll bring you in for more questions and comments. Does that work for you?
Yes, yeah.
All right. Okay.
Sorry, Brad.
I'm sure he doesn't mind.
Okay.
All right, Jared. So, something positive, which shouldn't be hard, and something you'd like to talk about.
Yes, I liked the narrator's perspective, which was, to me, very strange in a way that I was like, huh. Like a lot of the ways that they thought about, you know, the teeth you wouldn't expect on a pizza delivery person, like, because his teeth were, I was like, this is an interesting person. What is the way that they dealt with their environment was very specific, and I found that engaging. I would say my biggest note would be the amount of assumptions that seem to be made in the story. Like the assumption that ghosts are bad. I wasn't sure why that was. I didn't really understand the protagonist's relationship to ghosts. There seemed to be a lot of assumptions there. So yes, just a lot of assumptions that I think if they were clarified would help things out.
Thank you, Jared. And Ian, what are your thoughts? One positive, something to talk about.
I was not aware that the story was set in Tucson until this conversation. So I want to add that note that in terms of moving graves being a common thing there, knowing that it was in Tucson, I may have been able to make that connection. I did live in the Southwest. But in terms of something that I liked about it, I really liked that the story was told in the present tense, first person, the precarious tense. I think that when the precarious tense is done well, it's really effective. And I think in the context of what I interpreted to be a horror story, that's the right tense for it. You want to be right there in the character's head, experiencing what they're experiencing while they're experiencing it. And I also thought that the pacing was pretty tight. The inciting event was followed pretty swiftly by the character trying to overcome the obstacle of, getting out of the apartment, getting some supernatural aid from a mysterious friend who kind of like has an insight into it. I thought was helpful. And then the resolution, I have some disagreements with it, but in terms of the function that it fulfills, it's her achieving her goal, which is getting rid of her landlord so she can get out of there. In terms of something that I would want to talk about or come back to, I'm torn. On the one hand, I want to interpret it as a horror story, but we get 3, I think, nights of sleepless torment for Bree from the ghosts. And I don't remember there being a description of what they were doing that was so tormenting that like kept her up or that was so terrifying. And I feel like if it's intended to be a horror story, then you should scare me. You should scare the audience with whatever she's dreaming about. I think there's a lot of opportunity, and you're certainly creative enough that like you could come up with some really crazy stuff that's happening to Bree during those dreams. And then the only second thing that I would want to think about is the antagonist of the landlord and the way that that kind of resolves in the primary through line. I feel like she kind of jumped to a conclusion that the only solution to this ghost problem is that I got to move. And then the landlord is such an asshole for not letting me break my lease after 2 weeks of living here. And I don't know. I don't know if I bought that, especially because when Bree is talking to Keith later and he's like, why'd you move here in the first place? She says that she didn't have any place else to go, or he says you didn't have any place else to go, right? So she's gonna move out and then not have any place to live. So I thought that it made it hard for me to buy that as the primary conflict when I was following the story. I would have wanted her to either come to that as a last resort or have other ideas, or there to be more of a back and forth with the landlord about it. But those are my opening.
Thank you, Ian. And I would, I don't know how much more I can add. You guys are doing such a great job. I will say that I definitely appreciated the tense and the point of view. I thought there was, not to compare it to the previous story we read, but the level of my awareness of the character's personality by their thoughts and their speech was a lot stronger in this one, and I appreciated that a lot more. I would probably agree with maybe a combination of what Colin and Ian said, where the tone of the story was not confusing, but maybe it was doing two things at once, but neither one of them in a way that made me. I wanted to see more of both of the tones, I guess, the horror and the comedy aspects. And I don't know if that was a line that was intentionally walked, or if that's just where we are with the narrative. But yeah, I would say the horror elements were present and strong, and yet not necessarily evocative in the way that I might expect from horror. And that's probably the primary note that I had on the story. So, I mean, I know Ian kind of discussed that already, but that was something I'd want to talk about. So let me bring Grace in, the author, and let me ask you, Grace, if you have any specific direction for us. And if you don't, I can go ahead and go through everyone's critiques and we can address them individually.
This is really great. And in fact, I thought of something with the poltergeist thing. I thought of her having the conversation with Keith and saying, oh, it sounds like poltergeist. And then he could say, graves are moved. It happens a lot in Tucson. He doesn't know what poltergeist is because he was born too late or too early. But anyway, and I really like if we can continue on about the, I guess in the direction, I just love all this feedback so far. Her jumping to the conclusion. Yeah, maybe just keep going on. I don't have anything specific. I'm sorry about that.
Oh no, you're great. That's what I'm here for, Grace. You're not.
Okay.
It's not your job.
Yeah.
So
I
Jared,
just don't have anything.
that was something that you brought up about the level of assumptions that were in the narrative. So I don't know if you want to expand on that a little bit.
Sure. And I mean, kind of assumptions that the reader will assume things, or that the narrator has assumed things, or a combination. The first one, what's that?
Oh, I think it was he jumps to. Oh, Ian may have said it. Oh wait, you both said about the assumptions. Yeah. So just assumptions. Well, I wrote down. I didn't actually write down the specific ones that you said. So
I didn't say any specific ones,
okay.
but I'm about to.
Go ahead.
All right.
Thank you, Grace. And maybe it might be easier for us to answer the questions if Jared has a chance to finish before we jump in. Although I think we all very much appreciate that, that the fantastic direction that you're giving us.
I'm gonna try to talk less.
You're doing great, Grace. You're doing great.
Yes. So just in the opening, when the protagonist has some nightmares, and then they, from that, assume that the place is haunted. That was one of the assumptions I was wondering about, and because it was very interesting, I was like, "What? That's that perspective I was talking about. That's so unique." I was like, "This person has nightmares, and then is like for 2 weeks, and I was like, okay, this place is haunted. That's a really interesting person, and I'd love to know a bit more about where that comes from." I think eventually it became clear in the story that some of the stakes, at least in the beginning, were around the protagonist just not being able to sleep, which is horrific. Not being able to sleep is terrible. And so I thought actually that was really good stakes, and that if someone's unable to sleep, that something needs to change. That is not something that is a sustainable situation. So I would have liked to maybe have that be more clearly what is driving the protagonist's actions at the beginning, as they are so desperate to leave, because outside of that, it seemed that they were just kind of like, oh, well, it's ghosts, and these ghosts are really bad. I have to get away. And that seemed like another assumption of, well, the ghosts are bad, and I wanted to know more about what makes them bad. I think Ian mentioned that, maybe knowing a bit more about what they're doing that keeps her up, these nightmares, what's happening in them, are they terrorizing her? Those are some of the assumptions. And then I will just say, with all that, the ending was a little confusing because I did wonder why the ghosts were tormenting her if they were trying to help her. I wondered how that connected, with the rain coming through the windows and keeping her up, if they really just wanted to help her with the landlord. That was a little confusing.
Let me follow up with you, Jared, on something specifically that Ian mentioned about jumping to conclusions, and that was Bree's conclusion that the landlord was an asshole, that he couldn't break her lease in 2 weeks, and also her presumption that she needed to leave as a mechanism from escaping the situation she's in. How do you feel about that, Jared?
Well, sorry, good. I feel great. No, that definitely makes sense to me. Those do seem like some more assumptions that could be clarified, and again, I think are places where we can have more discovery about this very interesting protagonist.
All right, Grace, and I was just about to ask you something, Grace.
Can you just repeat it one more time?
You're talking to Jared, I take it?
The other two assumptions.
Oh, the other two assumptions were about Bree jumping to a conclusion that the landlord is an asshole for not letting her break her lease. And the other one was the assumptions of why does she feel the need to leave as opposed to some other kind of, and I think Ian's wider point, he can address this, although I do want to bring Colin and Brad in, was Ian, to Ian's point was that that we don't see her kind of make that choice, I guess, or make that decision, in the sense that there's potentially other avenues. But Ian, do you want to clarify that? And then actually hold on, Ian, before I bring you in, let me just make sure. Grace, is this an area you'd like to explore a little bit more? Because I know we only have 10 minutes. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I mean, we only have 10 minutes.
We do have some other stuff we can talk about.
Well, yeah, just maybe. I mean, I took the notes down, so I'm pretty clear on it.
Great.
On the assumptions. So, like, if we have other things to discuss, because it's only 10 minutes left.
Absolutely. So something that Brad brought up, and Brad, if you'd be willing to speak to this, was you were talking about the reasoning or explanation with the haunting being close to the movie Poltergeist, obviously. But how did you feel about because Jared just brought this up, the reason for the haunting at all? Was that clear to you? Did that make sense to you?
Yeah, I suppose so. Although it doesn't, none of it seems to. I mean, I guess the fact that spirits might be angry because their graves were defiled, I suppose. I mean, I don't really believe in the supernaturals, but that makes as much sense as any. Why I'd be angry. I mean, if I was if I was in the afterlife, but I guess. But I guess if I am angry and, am I seeking some sort of resolution to the fact that my graves were defiled? Do I want the gravestones restored? Am I just angry and seeking vengeance? It doesn't seem, it's like, well, I think it ties into what a lot of other people said. It's like, if we're not getting any specific message from the dreams as to what, these spirits, are seeking or doing, or why, or, and then it's resolved so easily, with just her throwing out this prayer to Doc Holliday, who, I mean, even though he's dead, he wasn't a Native American, I don't believe, and I don't know if his grave was defaced, so why would he even be kind of a proxy or speaking on behalf of the other spirits? So it's, I didn't need more basis for why the spirits might have been starting the haunting. Well, maybe I did, I guess, but I guess just like how the actions they were taking, related to that. And I definitely, like I think Ian said, I wanted more details about the dreams. I wanted to know how they were scary, why she wasn't able to sleep, not just that she wasn't able to sleep, but more detail about what she saw.
Can I ask to clarify something?
Of
Can I ask a
course.
question? Okay, so I understand that it was resolved too easily part, but then also, so you were saying, what do the ghost want? So you're thinking that the ghost should have like I don't know, an agenda or something, or a motivation? I was just a little confused about that. Can you explain a little more? What do
You're
the
asking
ghosts
Brad,
want?
right?
Yeah, Brad.
Yeah, I suppose so. I mean, it's I mean, I guess, and it doesn't have to be, this way, but I guess what I'm used to is, you know,
Why are they, oh, you mean why are they rising up? Why are they,
I mean, ghosts are
okay,
always angry because they were wronged or something was taken from them, and they're trying. There's always this, you have to restore this thing to their grave, or you have to properly bury their body, or something, for them to be at rest. And so,
mhm,
what it seems that for Bree to escape the situation, she either needs to make something whole with the spirits that is causing them to not be at peace, or she needs to escape, or something.
okay,
And
right, right.
And that was
Makes
a point
sense.
that Jared brought up as well. I remember was why are the ghosts bad specifically? Like what was the protagonist's reason for disliking ghosts? And I think both of those will add a layer of richness to the narrative. And I think obviously Grace, you've got a pretty good handle on the story. So I don't know if those are helpful or not, but I would probably agree with
Yeah,
both Brad and Jared on that. Go ahead, Jared.
I was going to say, I think the one thing maybe if we could talk about, I think Keith was really important to the story, obviously. He's like,
mhm,
very important. And I wanted to maybe talk about the relationship between her and Keith a little bit. She seems borderline obsessed with him very quickly. I do wonder about that. We're not really
mhm.
shown any kind of connection between them growing. He shows up and talks to her, and she seems like she's lonely, but I wanted to know a bit more about that connection and to understand um, how that worked. I think,
he has
yeah,
amazing
yeah,
teeth.
yes.
For a pizza guy, amazing teeth for a pizza guy.
Very specific detail. Colin, how did you feel about that? About the relationship between Keith and Bree?
I I don't have too much to comment on it, but I did think that early on there was a description that she was thinking about him during the day, and she described him as her salvation, and I just felt like that was a little bit like too heavy-handed, like foreshadowing that okay, this is the guy that's going to help her out. So I don't know if it's meant to be more mysterious than it is, but I felt like his role in the story as like the ghost helper was telegraphed like a little too loud, a little too early.
Well, and that moves into something actually, Colin, that you had mentioned in the original kind of round thing we did, which was about the reader being given information through exposition, but also that it. So okay, so I'll bring you to the point because we only have 3 minutes left. The point was Ian had mentioned that he felt the pace was pretty tight because we moved from introduction to inciting incident pretty well, and then pace on into the plot pretty cleanly. But you had mentioned early on that there's a decent amount of exposition that feels a bit potentially forced, and also that you didn't need it, that it was telegraphed well. And I think that kind of dovetails with what you just said. So I'm wondering if you could explain what you thought a little more.
Yeah, I think it was very much related to what we talked about with the assumptions. Like I just kind of interpret it differently. We were talking about it like it was assumptions that the character was making, whereas when I was reading it, I felt like it was more the writing as like things where we were being told what characters were like before we actually like got to know the character. So it was pretty much the same thing that we covered already.
Okay, but maybe phrase is more of like a telling versus showing kind of thing, and like to use the standard parlance for it, maybe.
Yeah,
All right.
I'm not a fan of that one.
I
But
know, right? It sucks. It doesn't explain anything, but I'm glad to hear you agree with me on saying that.
It's-
But let me ask you one more thing, Colin. So you said that it took a little while to get to the end. Do you still feel that it lagged a little bit if you without the exposition, or was it the exposition maybe that made you feel a little bit like it lagged?
uh,
And specifically, another thing you had mentioned was mystery, having mystery to pull us through as a form of tension.
yeah, I guess I just felt like it was predictable, or maybe a better way, maybe a different way is that the resolution just came about a little too easily. It just with the landlord being killed, but then the haunting stopped, and then the landlord didn't really seem to be an obstacle at all, which I thought was kind of funny, but I was a little bit confused of like, how did we get here?
That's something that I want to add a pin to, just because we were talking before about assumptions and the way that that causality goes together. I found that ending really troubling too, because the only reason that the landlord was a bad guy was he wouldn't let her move out because she was being terrorized by ghosts. And then the ghosts kill the landlord. So now the landlord's not preventing her from moving out to escape the ghosts that are terrorizing her. And it got me very confused about the character's motivation and the ghost motivation, because why were the ghosts terrorizing her if they hated the landlord? Or why were they killing the landlord on her behalf if it was just to escape them, who were the ones who were terrorizing her, making her the landlord in the first place? So that threw me for a loop once I got to the end of it, and I had to like kind of go back through it a few more times. So I just wanted to add my clarifying thoughts on that point.
I'm
The
gonna.
ghost stopped haunting
That's
her at
really
that
good.
point, right? So
That's-
she wouldn't even need to move out at the end, right? Because the landlord, she stopped having the nightmares. So then there's no reason to leave, right?
No, but that
Right,
asshole
right.
landlord's dead now.
Yeah. Okay, I see it. It's yeah. Okay, so the landlord she makes into a bad guy because he won't let her leave, and then there's a lot of I don't know what you call it, paradox, contradictions. Anyway, I have one quick question because I know it's 8 o'clock now. Did anybody like that the fact that Keith was apparently a ghost, or did anybody was that very was that a surprise to anybody? Was that anybody want to just tell me about that?
I thought, yeah, that it was a bit. It wasn't surprising. Are you saying by the end of the piece was it surprising when we kind of found out that she thought that?
Yeah.
I think I would agree with Colin then that certainly when the rain outside stops as if by magic and she gets to the door, it stopped as quickly as it started. I opened the door and the pizza guy is dressed in the same exact getup he was wearing last time. Weird. He's holding a pizza box in one hand, so I guess he had no luck. Like at that point in the story, I was certain he was a ghost.
Oh, okay. All right. All right. Oh,
I pegged him as a ghost at 1974 because that's just such a specific year to guess that I thought that
okay.
it meant that the author had a specific year for him in mind, and that would only make sense if he died in 1974. So I would either omit or muddy that detail to preserve the force.
Yeah, I would agree. The very first description of Keith, I thought, so specifically tied him to the past that it just didn't seem like he was wearing a few pieces of retro clothing, like he was some sort of, an avatar from the past or something. So I kind of suspected he was a ghost. And then, like Jared said, I think that scene with the rainstorm just solidified it, that there was no other possibility. I did like him as a character though, and I thought he was interesting. I think Colin might have mentioned this, but it would have been nice to see Bree fight for more information rather than having, because Keith kind of like fed her a little bit too easily. But I did think one of the things I felt like I missed when the story finished and when Bree realizes that she's a ghost, I think it would be interesting, or I think she would be interested in trying to find out like who he was or why he was even there. Because he wasn't angry. did he die in the building or something like that? You know, and why is he, you know, hanging out in the building as a spirit and then helping her? But I imagine the scene of her like reading old newspaper articles and finding out about the pizza guy or something like that, you know.
Right.
That's fantastic.
Thank
So we
you
are
so
8:03. So
much.
Grace, let me ask you, do you have any other comments or
That was
questions
so
you have for the group?
helpful, you guys. Really, really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Hey, we did a great job. Another great evening at the Critiquery. So thank you everybody so much. Thank you, Grace, for your submissions. I think I can speak for everybody when I say we all enjoyed them very much.
Thank you. I want to try to interrupt next time, though. It's just so bad. I just feel this need to keep clarifying, and
Oh my
it's
God, you're
good.
definitely an author then. I think we all feel
Oh.
that same struggle. So,
Okay.
but thank you everybody, and
Jared, before we go,
Thank you so much.
so Grayson specifically asked for ways to expand the story, and I have a
Oh.
few things that I didn't, I hadn't, you know, I still have a couple notes. Should I just send them to your email and you can forward them?
Sure, yeah, of course.
Thank you, Brad. Thank you so much.
No problem.
Really appreciate it, guys. Thank you.
Thank you for submitting.
Okay. Thank you, everybody. Have a
good
great
night, everybody.
week. Bye.
Good night, everybody. Bye. Wait a second.
Good night, Ian. Good night, Jared.
Good
Good
night,
night,
Brad.
Good night, Nadine. Good night, Jared. Good night, Brad.
Good night, John
Goodbye,
Boy.
Ian.
I was waiting for that.
Oh, Brad or Jared, would you go ahead and close the recording?
Oh, yes, of course. Where do I do it? All right.